This is the Erasing Shame podcast, Season 3. Honest talk for healthy living, growing, and thriving.
All right. Well, welcome everyone to Erasing Shame. This is your co-host, Nancy Lee, and I actually have a friend of mine today, Wendy Kim, who is joining us on this episode. And Wendy, we know each other from the entrepreneurial world. Actually, Wendy is a speaker and a business coach, and she actually just published her book this past year The book is called Beyond Blending In, an Immigrant Daughter's Guide to Overcoming Cultural Bonds for a Life of Authenticity and Abundance. And it actually became a #1 international bestseller on Amazon. So it's pretty awesome. I know we've had a lot of conversations in the past, and actually Wendy comes from the corporate background as well and loves to be able to pour into people and has really found herself planted here in the Asian American community and starting to talk about a lot of things about shame. So yeah, welcome to our podcast, Wendy.
Thank you so much. I'm super excited to be here.
Yeah. So quickly, do you want to share anything a little bit about your experience in terms of writing the book and becoming a coach and just a little bit about your background?
Sure. Actually, it was interesting. Where do I start? So I come from the corporate world, and I grew up very much just checking the boxes, doing well in school and like going to a good college and then working for like a good company and having like the house in the burbs and the 2.1 kids and like all of that. And I thought like if I checked all the boxes that would make me happy. But then in my 30s, I was like, wait, this was supposed to make me happy. Why am I not happy? and that's what I just did, like a lot of soul searching. And definitely one of the things that came up for me was my cultural background. And I don't want to dishonor my parents. I don't want to disrespect this path that they laid out for me, but I want to be authentic and true to who I am. How do I reconcile that? So a lot of the book is talking about that journey and being authentic, but at the same time still being honoring of my family and the culture I come from.
Yeah. And I know we throw a lot about that word around in the entrepreneurial world, but for most people who've never really started using those terms of being authentic, what does that really look like or mean?
Yeah, so I think what it means for me is that, well, one thing would be saying really what's on my mind instead of saying like I grew up being very inauthentic in the sense that I wouldn't necessarily express what I felt. I would communicate what I thought other people around me wanted to hear. And so whether it was my parents or friends, it wasn't really about me sharing, oh, this is what I think, this is what I believe. It was, okay, well, how do I make sure that they're happy with me or that they like me? What do I say that they'll agree with? Mm-hmm. And so always having kind of like this disparity, if you will, between really what was true to me and what I really thought, and not being able to express that, and then what I felt other people wanted from me.
Yeah, and I find that that's so common because of our culture.
Yes.
Because of the honor, respect, and the shame stuff. I mean, how do you feel that really connects with the shame piece that is part of our culture?
Ooh, that's a deep question.
Yeah, I mean, I've had to think about this, but I'm not sure about you in terms of writing your book and uncovering all this.
Yeah, I think for me, shame is a really big part of the Asian culture. And I think like growing up, I think my parents, and I think most Asian parents think like, okay, well, we want to help our children to be successful and to do well in this world. And so if that means that we have to shame them or make them feel bad for what they did, then they'll learn. So if it's like, okay, like I maybe like I said something that was inappropriate in front of another person. Okay, well let's like make Wendy feel really bad about that and feel really guilty about that so that she doesn't do that again. So that she can have a better life ultimately. Like that, I think that was the intent. Their intent was it was a good intent, but but obviously we know now that shame is not necessarily the best way. But I will tell you, as a mom myself, you end up responding the way that you were raised.
Yeah.
And I've seen in with my kids the tendency, and I've done it myself, to want to shame them.
Mm-hmm.
And thinking that it's helping them. So I've had to do like a lot of therapy and personal development and classes to actually break out of that cycle. But yeah, I know like our parents, they learned that from their parents, and then it was kind of continued on through generations, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think like the interesting thing is because we're entrepreneurs, and so we've been on this journey of personal development. But I just went to this amazing leadership retreat this past weekend too, and they said that pretty much over 85% of her clients don't really know who they are, and everything that is coming out is performance. And thinking back of our identity in terms of how we talked about, like we always thought that we had to just say what we were expected to say. So much of that is very ingrained in our culture, and I think there's a lot of people that don't ever even get to that place of realizing that there's something deeper, right?
Yeah, I feel like, I mean, shame has been a big part of the overall American culture in general, but I feel like it's even stronger in the Asian American culture. And like I think one of the ways you can see that is that like Asian Americans in general tend to not speak up as much, or we're quieter, or we're more reserved. And a lot of that is because, oh, well, I don't want to say the wrong thing, or maybe this will come across the wrong way. Let me be very careful about what's actually coming. And that was something that I've had to work on, is like, no, it's okay to say what I think. It's okay to put it out there and not have to analyze it to death before I actually put it out. You know what I mean?
Analysis paralysis is what they call
yeah. Yeah. And just being quiet, because I don't want to get hammered for saying the wrong thing. And that probably does come from our childhood.
Yeah. And the thing is, because in our cultural norm too, is usually when you speak out, there's so much criticism that follows too, as opposed to any signs of encouragement typically.
Yeah.
So it is something that when you decide to speak up, there's, I think, an added weight or added risk that you're taking to be seen, right? To be that blade that sticks above the rest.
Exactly. Actually, I have a good story about that, because I'm half Korean, half German. And until I was 11, I lived in Pittsburgh. So I lived in a very white, and I would say African American community, but very few Asians. And then when I was 11, I moved to live with my mom in Hawaii, which is a predominantly Asian community. And I was really like, I would raise my hand all the time, like in class. I was like the teacher's pet. And that was acceptable in Pittsburgh. However, and part of it could have been like going into middle school and stuff, but when I got to Hawaii, I remember like I was like the only kid raising my hand in the classroom. And then like all the other kids were like this, and kind of like giving me like a weird look. And then after class, people were like, "Wendy, you're such a show off." And from that moment, I told myself, okay, I can't really speak up. I can't really say what I'm thinking, because people are gonna think badly of me. They're not gonna accept me.
Yeah.
So that was definitely like a big part of my upbringing, and I would say only in the past couple of years have I been able to push past that.
Yeah, there's that story about the crab mentality, right? Crabs in the bucket.
Yeah,
In terms of
yeah,
how they talk about our culture of it's hard for any one person to succeed because constantly when you're trying to, make strides ahead, the other people are going to constantly pull you down. So it is a challenge. And I feel like, especially in the entrepreneurial world where there can be a lot of competition or a lot of times people trying to put their voice out there, um, there's not a lot of support, I'd say, within the Asian community specifically, like we've talked about in the past. And I think the way I've had to see that was, kind of like the scenario you just gave of in the classroom. Like, I don't know if it's been more out of a self-hate and projecting that hate or shame towards one another, competition. What are your thoughts about that?
yeah. Well, I do feel like so much of the Asian culture is about status.
Status.
So
Hmm.
yeah, status. So it's like, okay, well, what kind of you? So people obviously know the phrase "keeping up with the Joneses," and in my book, I mean, I'm Korean, so I put "keeping up with the Kims" because you you would like look at, oh well, what kind of car are they driving, and like where in my community, okay, what school, like what private school do they go to, or like what college did they go to, or like where do they work, or what kind of job do they have, and what neighborhood like that, what kind of handbag, like all these things were very much a part of my upbringing.
Yeah, and even one step further from what I've seen a lot in the Korean community is like the plastic surgery phenomenon, right?
Yeah,
Like looking the part
which
too.
I have not
Looking like
gotten
the
done,
top.
by the way.
Yeah, no, I know you don't, but it is a phenomenon in
Oh yeah, like that.
culture. Yeah,
Yeah, there. I feel like, of course, when you say Asian, even that is so broad
it's
because
broad.
I
Yeah,
mean, I've
and
lived in
culture.
Japan and I speak Japanese and I know so much about that culture, and but I have the Korean background, and so like within, but in the Korean culture, I would say, I would say in general in Asia, like your looks, obviously for women, your looks are very important, but now in Korea, like they've kind of taken it to the next level with
Yeah,
like the K-pop and the Korean dramas, and yeah, so it's hard. I feel like in that with that culture to be like authentic when you're always feeling like you have a standard that someone else is putting on you to live up to.
mhm. Yeah. So, how did you start breaking through that on your own journey?
Yeah, so I think when I was in the, like, as I said, throughout my life, I was very much following the rules and following the playbook and doing what was expected of me to be successful. And then when I was in my mid 30s, I would say I had achieved like a, a good level of success in my career, and I was making good money and I looked successful. But at the end of the day, like I was actually, so I did this thing where 5 years, I wrote down where I was 5 years ago. And I would tell you, and that was right around when I started my business, but I felt super isolated. I felt super alone. I didn't really have many good friends because I felt like I couldn't really let them know what was really going on inside.
Mm.
I was numbing my pain through online shopping. Even though I made good money, I was not saving. I was like in a bad financial situation, but of course nobody knew. It looked good on the outside. I had this, I worked for PlayStation. I had like done a lot there and was successful as this program manager, senior program manager, but I was just really unfulfilled. I felt like, okay, am not really helping people on a day-to-day basis. There's not a lot of meaning to the work that I'm doing. And I just thought, okay, can I keep doing this for 30 more years until I retire? And and also another thing that was going on is I have my son was also having different challenges. He has special needs, and that there was a lot of shame about that.
Yeah.
And I was dealing with that, but I didn't feel like I could tell people a lot of times or get help around that. And so it all looked good on the outside, but inside I was not happy. I was really struggling.
Yeah.
And so I think that's where one of the, I don't know if, I'm sure you know Brene Brown. Brene Brown, for the listeners, is a shame researcher. So actually reading her work and following her really, really helped me because I didn't know how to be authentic. Like I didn't know how to be real. I didn't know how to be vulnerable. I didn't know how to share a lot of what was going on. And I also come from the from a very conservative Christian background.
Mm-hmm.
And there was actually a lot of shame from that about like, okay, you need to behave in a certain way, and if you don't, then God is not happy or things like that. So there were all these like things from my childhood coming up. And so I think like reading Brene's work, Brene Brown, and and just taking like baby steps, and I also started to do a lot more personal development as well.
What is
And
personal development for you?
so different like courses and conferences that like help to kind of have a more, I think like I grew up kind of thinking that life happened to me instead of looking at myself as no, you're in charge of your life, including your problems.
Yes.
Like you don't have to just like wallow in your problems. You can actually take action. So definitely like someone like Tony Robbins or Brene Brown, like those people, I started to like follow these people and realize, wow, like there's people out there who are teaching how to live an empowered life.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And then that's how I actually got into, wait, like I started off more around financial empowerment,
Mm-hmm.
but then expanded beyond that as well. So yeah, that's, does that answer your question?
Yeah, yeah. And I know that you came from the corporate world, and I did too. Particularly, you worked with a lot of corporate management. But when we think about it, there are not that many Asian American leaders in corporate management. And
Yeah,
it's something that's really, we've had to kind of take a step back and take a look at because it's not representative of the amount of people that are working in a given company in terms of the
definitely,
leadership.
definitely.
So what would you say about that?
I don't know if you and I talked about this before, but there was like a Harvard business study that said that in Silicon Valley, that Asian Americans are the most represented minority amongst workers.
Yes.
However, they're the least represented minority amongst management.
Yes, yes, yes.
And yeah, definitely. I, even being like a project manager, a program manager, there were not a lot of Asians doing that. There were a lot of Asian engineers,
Mm-hmm.
but not in management, project program management, and just management directors, things like people like that. So I think, and I actually had a conversation with a fellow, actually an Asian Canadian client of mine, and I think we, part of the culture has been like, okay, from a young age, do well academically. Like just study hard, work hard, get good grades, follow this process.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And you'll succeed. Like memorize things, like get good test scores, and you will succeed. But I think the thing that hasn't necessarily been cultivated a lot of times, in at least for me growing up, was okay, how can you be more creative? How can you think out of the box? How can you be a leader? It
Hmm.
wasn't how
Yeah.
can you question like the status quo and come up with something better. Like that wasn't like a skill set that was really encouraged
Yeah.
growing up. Like that's something I encourage in in my children.
Hmm.
So, but that wasn't like for me to question authority, for me to question my parents was never encouraged.
Yeah.
Whereas for me, and I'm not saying I always respond well to this, but in general, when my kids question me, I I don't just shut them down. Like I ask them, well, what do you mean by that? And oh, well, what do you think? Uh, and I'm trying to really cultivate more leadership skills, if you will.
Yeah, and I had a chance to meet them too, so they're amazing. Yeah, and it's one of those things where we didn't have that growing up, where we had the opportunity to be questioned or share our thoughts. It was always just obey, and that was the end of the question, right?
Yeah.
And we even talk about in leadership development a lot about John Maxwell, right?
Yeah.
And he does the whole five levels of leadership, and most of the world operates from a level one positional leadership, and it really
Hmm.
takes some growth and development to be able to climb the ladder of leadership and learning one how to lead yourself, and then to be able to lead others, and then eventually to lead leaders. But
Yeah.
always just sat at that bottom level one leadership, and that was comfortable for us. And I think there's an aspect too of where the shame aspect of our brain, like, this is what our coach, we had a mutual life coach, right, Kim,
Hmm.
was telling
Yeah.
me when I first got training with her, and she's like, there's like a part of your brain that you're not using when you're not in the creative space, right? And I'm learning a lot of it on the psychology side right now, but it's actually through arrested development, that
Mhm.
parts of our brains, when we're not exercising that, because we weren't given that nurturing as a kid, we didn't have a psychological, physical, sorry, biological part of our brain that developed that creates more of that creative side of us. So it's kind of crazy.
Yeah, and I think one of the things though that I do think Asians actually have can be really amazing leaders.
Hmm.
And one of my passions is actually how do we, because I think a lot of times I felt like, okay, as an Asian American, to be a leader, I basically need to be like your typical white American would be,
Yes.
right? Your typical white American leader would be. But I think that there are actually things from our culture that we don't have to throw away. We can actually embrace,
Exactly.
and we can have like a different way of leading, and
Mhm.
also a very effective and empowering way. So, for instance, a, of course, Asians tend to be a lot more consensus based. We tend to have more of a group, a lot think about the group and what does the group need, and I think that that's actually really important. It's not just about okay, it's my way or the highway, like leadership, or like shut up and just get her done. Like we actually take into consideration other people and what their feedback is and their needs, and then we can actually come up with a better collective buy-in and solution that people will actually be bought into and follow through with. So I think that there are things that have hindered us, but then I also think that there are things that we have as an advantage, if you will.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. That was the last episode that I talked about in terms of our cultural strengths. And you just highlighted that exact point of, well, we are a little bit, weaker in this area, but this is where our strength is. And this is a perfect example that you're able to share, because I believe that that's one of my strengths. And then it's
Yeah.
recognizing then how do you flourish in that, and like have the right environment or career or right setting or entrepreneurial project that can actually really nurture that as well. So,
So there was a study done where they would have people either think of a friend who was from the same culture or
mhm.
think of a friend from a different culture. And they found out that the people who thought of a friend from a different culture were more creative in their solutions. and to fixing a problem. So I really believe that, like, the more diversity in leadership, the more diversity in general, the more perspectives we'll have, and the better able we'll be able to come up with solutions to problems that will benefit the entire community.
Exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
because we all have different things that we can contribute and bring to the table, and I think it's beautiful when we can really talk about diversity and
Yeah.
on those strengths. Yeah, I'm all about that.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then other thing too. I mean, I know that you're stepping into a lot more work with the Asian American community right now, and we've been kind of talking about the importance of bringing together the community, because from what I've seen is they're so separated, and it's kind of like we're all feeling this, but we're feeling it in our own way on our own island. And I'm
Yeah.
grateful that the Asian community as a whole, we're starting to move forward, finding our voice and stepping into things like podcasting or writing
Yeah.
books and stuff like that. What other things are kind of in the next horizon for you in terms of that area?
Yeah, so definitely doing more around, like, public speaking around these issues, as well as something that I'm coining as, like, Asian American or Asian leadership,
Hmm.
because leadership is something that I'm really passionate about. Most people, like, when they hear leadership, they're like, "What?" Like if you ask people, like, who wants to be a leader, most people are like, "Not me." But
I'm
really,
like the opposite.
yeah, I think they have, like, a misconception about leadership. Leadership to me is really about being true to who you are,
Yes.
and really expressing what your passions are, and what your contribution is to the world and to a conversation. So I'm really passionate about leadership in general, but in particular empowering more Asian Americans to be able to not hold back who they are and bring their unique voice to the table, because I feel like we've been so held back, and a lot of it has been kind of like what I talk about in the book, wanting to blend in, wanting to fit in, wanting to, coming from an immigrant background, feeling like, oh, well, I need to assimilate, and I don't want to be different. And instead of, like, recognizing, wow, like, the fact that we have this unique cultural background is actually a real strength and something that we can bring to the conversation.
Yes, yes. What else would you say? I mean, we don't fully see that the Asian community is united.
Hmm.
What do you feel like would be a solution or an encouragement to the community in terms of being able to better support one another, whether it's just, business or just personal life, and being more positive in that arena?
Yeah, that's a good question. I think, uh, well, I think the way I grew up, which is sad, and I don't know if a lot of people know this who aren't Asian, but it, like, even within the Asian community, there's tribalism, or, like, comparisons and racism, I would say, where
Mhm.
it's like, oh, okay, uh, like, I'm Korean, so I'm better than you if you're, like, Vietnamese, or even Chinese,
So
or
we should never be having this conversation.
what?
So
I know,
in the
right? Like, we
original
should keep
traditional sense,
talking.
because I'm Vietnamese and you're Korean.
Yeah, yeah, and it's like, oh, well, you're Indian, or you're Filipino, or you're, like, whatever, like, you're Southeast Asian versus East Asian, and you're there, and it's just so ridiculous and absurd, right?
Yeah, yeah.
When in fact we have, and I'm not saying that we're all the same. There's differences in the culture, right? However, really, there's a lot of similarities, and if we could come together and support each other, I just think, like, how much impact could we have
Yes.
in the world in a positive way? Because like, I know for me, I actually kind of wanted to disassociate from Asians growing up,
Hmm.
because I thought that I there was a shame around being Asian,
Yeah.
because I would just see everyone else, these white people or whatever, and feel like, oh, well, I don't want to show that I'm different. I just want to blend in. But now I see, like, wow, there's such a beauty in each of these communities. And if we can come together, then I feel like when one group is elevated, then everybody gets elevated.
Yes,
Yeah.
exactly.
So I think just what we're doing now, like having more conversations about it. I think a lot of it is people like you and me actually putting together podcasts, writing books, starting businesses, having conversations, and letting our voice be heard so that different perspectives can get out there, and ultimately, hopefully, inspiring other people like us who maybe feel scared or afraid to share their voice to ultimately feel like they can do that.
Exactly. Yes, I
Yeah.
know that our time is up, but if people wanted to get in contact with you or learn more about the work that you're doing, where can they go?
Yes. So my website is yourdreamrealized.com. And you can also find me under Your Dream Realized Coaching on Facebook, or you can even send me a personal message on Facebook under Wendy Kim as well. And I'm on LinkedIn as well.
Yeah, and we're going to post all of her information on the website as well. I know that you specialize in executive coaching, right? And leadership development.
Well, entrepreneur. I work with entrepreneurs and executives.
Entrepreneurs. Okay, awesome. Well, thanks so much for your time, Wendy. I can't wait to see you again at the next event because I know you're doing a lot of events and speaking engagements here in San Diego. So I will see you then soon.
Yay. Thank you so much. This has been awesome, Nancy.
You're welcome. And thanks everyone else for watching Erasing Shame. We are erasing shame one story at a time. Thank you.
Thank you for being a part of Erasing Shame. Please rate and review on iTunes, subscribe on YouTube, and like on Facebook. Share with your friends and followers. Get all the details at erasingshame.com.